welcome back. Today I'm going to solve also paper 1 style question, but this will be from a specimen paper from 2020. This paper is going to be the same, or the format of this paper is going to be the same for those who are going to sit for May-June 2020. So as you can notice here, the title or the name of the paper now is Short Answer and Data Response. The changes are few. The time is still the same. There is no change in the time. There is no change also in the marks given. We still have 80 marks for this paper. And of course, the distribution of the marks changed, as you noticed in my previous video, that the weight of the marks now is different, and you might see new command words in the questions. Okay, so I'll start doing number 2. It has finance, and someone asked me about this, so I decided to do this question. Okay, so we're talking here about a business, someone who's called Isaac. Isaac owns a small fish restaurant. So he employs 2 chefs, 2 cooks, and 3 workers who serve in the restaurant. So we're talking about a small one. And Isaac is trying to increase added value to improve profit. You know, increasing added value could happen by several ways. This is from chapter 1. Isaac has been looking at his financial performance, and we have a table here. And remember, every time you have numbers, it's a good chance for you to gain application marks, because simply I can use them in my answers, of course. So I'm talking here about an income statement. You know, income statement includes revenue, cost of sales, gross profit, expenses, and the profit. And we have 2 years, last year and current year. Okay, let's just continue here. Isaac received a number of complaints. So many people are complaining about his food, about his fish, dishes, whatever. I just imagine the situation. He knows he must improve quality, but cannot decide on the best way. So he's planning to improve his quality, but still he doesn't know. Maybe we can help him in the questions if they ask us. Okay, so let's start with the first one. As you can see here, the word what is meant is now deleted. We have a new command word, which is define. Define is the same as what is meant, so they are not different at all. Define revenue. Revenue, as you know, is the money that the business makes out of sales of its goods and services. I can write this in the exam, or simply I can write the rule and still gain a full mark of 2. So revenue is simply the price times the quantity sold. If you write this, you simply gain 2 marks. Or if you want, you can write the income of the business from the sale of its goods and services. It's the same. Then part B, calculate X and Y. So I go back to this, and I notice that I have missing revenue in last year, and in current year I have missing expenses. Just imagine and remember. Now you have to remember what you studied in chapter, I guess, 24 in the income statement. So what I need to do here is simply understand that income statement always starts with revenue minus the cost of goods sold, or cost of sales as we call it. And after cost of sales, I'll get the gross profit. So this revenue will be minus the cost of sales. Okay, it will give me the gross profit minus the expenses. That will give me the profit, or operating profit, or net profit, same name, but now they call it profit. Okay, so if I know these things, then I can understand that revenue minus cost of sales will give me gross profit. So let's just go back. That means simply, if I add gross profit to cost of sales, it will give me what? It will give me revenue, right? So the revenue here will be what? Will be 300. So how would I write it? You can write it 300, or simply you can write it 300,000. Why 1,000? Because the table is in thousands. It's not only 300, but you can write it this way. If we see Y now, Y is about expenses. So here, gross profit is 150 minus a number will give me 15. So it would be what? 150 minus what will give me 15? Simply it will be 135. So I can write it this way, 135 or 135,000. It's the same. I write one of these, of course. So it's enough to write 135. Okay, so this is for part B. Now, for C, before you used to see identify and explain two ways that could increase added value. So they replaced identify and explain by the word outline. Outline is almost the same. When I ask you to outline ways of increasing added value, as if I'm saying, list your idea and illustrate. So it's the same. Don't just panic. Outline is the same as identify and explain. Sometimes they don't put options here. They just give you a few lines and you have to write. So remember, the weight is 4 marks. And when I say 4 marks, you know, knowledge and application, right? So here, an easy question. Outline 2 ways Isaac could increase added value. Let's go back and just remember, we are talking about a small fish restaurant, right? A small fish restaurant that sells fish and meals related to fish. He has 2 chefs. Remember, I am like refreshing my memory. I always do that. I just imagine a restaurant. I imagine a small fish restaurant. I even imagine Isaac. In this way, I can easily answer, because, you know, business is all about getting the right idea from real life. Everything we're talking about here is a real life example. So it's easy to know it, even if I didn't study. Sometimes it's common sense. So outline 2 ways he could increase added value. How can a small fish restaurant increase added value? This will rely basically on my study. I know that increasing added value in chapter 1 will happen in 2 ways, by increasing price and reducing cost, right? So Isaac simply could do this. So if I want to say outline 2 ways Isaac could increase his added value, I can say increase price. Remember, here there is an application mark. So if he increases his price, I go back and I know here, if Isaac increases his price, wouldn't his gross profit and the profit increase? Because if you increase this number, I mean, if you increase your prices, your revenue will increase. So simply your profit will increase, and of course the gross profit and profit will increase. So these 2 figures will increase. So here, notice I went back to the income statement because I need the application marks. I need to tell the examiner so that, for example, Isaac will have a greater margin, because I know that gross profit margin and net profit margin, of course, they will be more. I mean, I'll make more profit per meal served. It's enough? Yes, it's enough. I'm here just illustrating the idea as usual, as I did before. So I'm just illustrating the idea, right? Then way 2, I can say reduce costs of materials. And then I can say how he can reduce cost of materials. See, how would I answer? What I'm talking about, a small fish restaurant. What do? They buy fish and they sell it to people. How would they reduce the cost of materials? Simply, they buy cheaper fish, right? This is logic. So I can use this. So I can say Isaac could use or buy cheaper fish from suppliers. That's all. So in this answer, I just got a mark for my knowledge and a mark for my application. Okay, now for part D. D, explain two problems that low quality might cause Isaac's business. This is chapter 20 on new paper, on new book, because the old book, it used to be, I think, 19. So explain two problems. Also, the question used to be identify and explain two problems. There is no need to tell me to identify, because I know I have to say, or I have to talk about the problem. I have to mention it and I have to talk about it. So here, explain two problems that low quality might cause Isaac's business. So as usual, I'll get 1 mark for my knowledge and 1 mark will be for application, giving the application. And of course, 1 mark will be for the explanation. So here, if we go back to the chapter and what you studied, you know that we have many problems of low quality. We might lose customers, we might have cost of fines. Remember, I'm talking about a restaurant. So just imagine, how would a small fish restaurant beside your house suffer from low quality? What problems he might face? So we have many things, reputation and these things. All what I need to know is just put them on paper. Just show the examiner that you understand the problem and its explanation. So we can say, for example, problem 1, let's say, loss of existing customers, or maybe losing loyal customers. It's up to you. In the explanation now, we can say if, for example, I can say if food, let's say, or fish meals or whatever, does not taste right, comma, Isaac might lose his loyal customers, and this might, or this will lead to a loss in revenue if the goods or the enough, we can say just if food doesn't taste right, Isaac might lose his loyal customers, and this will lead to a loss in revenue. So, or this will lead in lower revenue. So we can simply say this. It's enough. I am here showing that if he sell products or goods, or in this case I'm talking about meals, food that doesn't taste right, he will lose the customers, right? And I need the analysis, like, okay, what will happen? Simply his revenue will reduce, and I know that if his revenue will reduce, his profit will reduce, right? In problem 2, I can say, for example, cost. Remember, we have many answers. Cost of fines. Okay, a small fish restaurant, if simply he sells poor quality fish, and customers complain, so he might pay a lot of money because of fines. So we can say this. If I always like to start with if, because it forced me to complete the sentence. That's why. If Isaac sells poor quality fish, comma, he might be breaking the country laws, so he might pay heavy fines if, for example, customers let's say complain. Okay, so this is an answer. I can have another answer. There is, for example, damage of the reputation of the restaurant, so customers might go elsewhere, for example. This is an answer that could be. Why not? Okay, so this is part D. Part E now, that has also 6 marks, as you know, and in this part I'm going to answer a question which is, do you think? So do you think that profitability of Isaac's Fish Restaurant has improved since last year? Justify your answer. Every time I'm asking you about profitability, of course, I need to show, let's say, some calculations, right? So if you go back to this and I ask you about profitability, remember, I can find here many rules. So I have to apply ratios. If I look at the gross profit, I can find gross profit margin, which is gross profit divided by revenue times 100, right? Not only this, I can find also the profit margin, which is profit over sales times 100. Anyways, when we talk about profitability, you know, we have two major rules, gross profit margin and net profit margin. So these two will show me the profitability of the business. So here we can simply apply the rule and just do them. I can find the gross profit margin and the net profit margin and simply illustrate what happened. So here they will give me 2 marks for relevant ratios. It increased for the knowledge, as you know, and 2 marks for the calculation. And simply a justified decision, also up to 2 marks if I illustrated or just give a justified decision whether profitability has improved. Remember, I can write a lot of things here, but what matters most is the calculation part. Okay, so we can simply calculate them together. If you go back, gross profit margin here, so for last year it will be 120 over 300 times 100, and the other one will be 150 divided by 300 over or times 100. So if you calculate them, you see that last year was 40% and this year is 50%. So why? Because you notice that the cost of sales reduced, so we have more control over our variable cost. If you look at the profit margin reduced. It was 30 divided by 300 times 100, 15 divided by 300 times 100. So the profit margin reduced from 10% to 5%. And you ask also yourself why, and you notice that your expenses boosted from 90 to 135, and this is mainly the reason why profit margin always reduce. Remember, we calculated why it was 135. Okay, so I can now write my answer and illustrate, and I give my opinion, right? We can say, for example, the gross profit margin of Isaac's business improved from 40%, okay, to 50%, which means that Isaac had a better control over his variable costs, or the costs of say fish purchase. Maybe we have many more, of course, but here, since we are talking about Isaac as a restaurant, okay, then I say, however, the profit margin went down from 10%, okay, to 5%. This is of course after calculations, and this might be, might be an increase in expenses. So Isaac had less control over them or over his expenses. We can tell, you can always say they increase from this to this, so no problem. We are just comparing. I can show more, I can say more, I can talk about the revenue. So I can go back, for example, I can tell that revenue, okay, stayed the same. All those revenues stayed the same. See, revenue stayed the same, but his gross profit improved in the current year. So I showed the main things, that he had control over cost of sales and he had no control over his expenses. So I compared everything. Here I can always compare things. I can compare revenue, but here it's almost the same, 300 and 300. I compared the gross profit, I compared the expenses. So the idea is simple and clear, and now the examiner knows that I'm showing good knowledge and good use of ratios. In my opinion, now it's up to you to talk about your opinion. In my opinion, Isaac had the same revenue, but still he has problems in profit. So I will say that the profitability has not improved, in my opinion, because profit margin is important. A big increase in expenses is a problem. He won't be able to improve his profitability with a high increase in his expenses, especially that his revenue is not increasing. He's facing problems in building reputation. So here I'm analyzing. Every one of you can analyze the same way or simply in a different way. So I can say, in my opinion, okay, Isaac or Isaac's, let's say, profitability has or hasn't improved because his profit margin reduced and his expenses increased by, I think the expenses increased by, just go back to check, from 90 to 135. So here we are talking about $45,000. This is a really big number. So I'll mention this, increased by $45,000. Okay, so why I'm saying this? To just convince the examiner that I'm not happy with his performance and profitability. So because his profit margin reduced and his expenses increased by 45,000, which were put his business in problems. Okay, especially, I'll also mention just because as if I know what I'm talking about, that Isaac is already suffering from low sales and let's say customer complaints. So I'll tell you what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to convince the examiner that I know that I'm not happy with his profitability. I want to convince the examiner. Remember, I need to justify my decision. So I'm just going back to the context, imagining the situation, and then I put my answer just to convince the examiner. Remember, you can say the opposite and still convince the examiner. One would say, no, he's doing well. One would say, no, he's not doing well. For me, I wrote this answer, so it's up to you to give the answer that you want at the end, but still just convince the examiner, or being able to convince the examiner. Okay, it's up to you at the end, remember. Okay, So I think that's all for this question. I hope you received a good benefit out of it. Remember the style of specimen paper. Remember the command words. Just be familiar with these command words if you have a problem. Hopefully, I'll do more papers from different years. So stay safe and take care, and see you in another paper.